Hello everybody, what is up? It is Zem here, and today I'm going to be discussing something that isn't exactly my usual content on this channel. Normally I discuss music and production, and today I want to delve into another one of my favorite interests, drugs. Truthfully, I wanted to get a video like this out there because I feel as though on this platform and elsewhere, the coverage of Benadryl, Datura, and other deliriants is often heavily misrepresented and often narrativized into something that is so far from reality, I consider it heavily irresponsible. Like some of you watching this, I've had my fair share of experience with deliriants, particularly diphenhydramine, and I often find myself cringing heavily and sometimes becoming outright angry at some of the content I see regarding this class of substances as a whole. With that being said, I wanted to make a video to educate and inform people on the truth of deliriants, complete with the good, the bad, and the ugly, as well as some of the science behind them and the potential risks and consequences of consuming these substances. First things first. Deliriants are not a drug class that I would recommend anyone try. To be clear, they are often heavily unpleasant, rather unpredictable, and they are incredibly bad for your body. And we will be going further into exactly how these substances impact your brain and body later on. That's kind of the major point of this video, but I wanted to make that clear from the outset. So, what are deliriants? In essence, they are a subclass of hallucinogenics that was separated from your typical psychedelics such as psilocybin or LSD in the 1980s due to their, well, more delirious properties. The mechanism of action for deliriants often comes from anticholinergic properties, in other words, blocking acetylcholine receptors in your brain. Now, you may be saying to yourself right now, Zem, what the fuck is an anticholinoscopy? And well, my dear viewer, fear not, for I will break it down for you as best as I can. Acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter responsible for a wide variety of functions in the central and peripheral nervous system. These functions include the activation of skeletal muscles, automatic processes of digestion, and feelings of restfulness, as well as some cardiovascular effects regarding the release of nitric oxide, which lowers blood pressure through a process called vasodilation. And in the central nervous system, acetylcholine plays an important role in the enhancement of alertness, attention, as well as learning and memory. It also plays a role in reward, arousal, and neuroplasticity. In essence, acetylcholine is an important transmitter in keeping your body running and your brain functioning. Damage to the cholinergic system in the brain has been associated with memory deficits related to Alzheimer's. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, well, that seems important. Why would anybody want to block those functions from working as intended? And you, my dear viewer, would be entirely valid in thinking that. Those functions, while not outright reversed, are often severely inhibited in the event of an anticholinergic overdose. And anticholinergic overdose is, in essence, the core function of deliriants as a whole. And now that you have a preliminary understanding of what acetylcholine does in the mind and body, we can now begin to delve into the properties of anticholinergic activity. The delirium from deliriants is primarily produced through the antagonism of acetylcholine receptors in your brain, resulting in a wide range of the bodily and brain functions I mentioned before, as well as some others, not entirely operating as intended. The delirious quality of these drugs that separate them from traditional hallucinogens come in the form of less lucid hallucinations and more disturbed states of mind. Rational thought is often dampened on deliriants, and more than that of other hallucinogenic subclasses like psychedelics. This disturbed state of mind can take the shape of paranoia and agitation, or in the more extreme forms, outright delusions and loss of rational thought altogether. Some studies have claimed that the schizophrenic brain tends to have lower levels of acetylcholine and atypical cholinergic action, which could be associated with psychosis and paranoia. I will say that the world of anticholinergics hasn't exactly been thoroughly explored, and that the research is unfortunately less common than it should be, so knowledge on the relation between the two is not exactly plentiful. Oftentimes, deliriant users report feeling a heightened state of agitation where small sounds or movements can cause them to jump out of fear. This, combined with the presence of auditory and visual hallucinations, can result in the furthering of anxiety and paranoia felt during a deliriant trip. On that topic, let's talk about the nature of deliriant hallucinations. The hallucinations one gets from a deliriant often differ from traditional psychedelics by quite a bit. The way in which anticholinergics function causes your brain to not entirely filter visual stimuli as it would while sober. This can result in a sort of haze of floaters and static-like snow over your vision. This static-like effect, referred to as visual snow, can remain long after the usage of deliriants in the event of one acquiring HPPD or hallucinogen persisting perception disorder. I could and might make a video on HPPD as a whole, as it's something I live with on the day-to-day, so if that's something you're interested in learning more about, let me know down below. But back to deliriants. This haze of floaters and static also provides for some of the more distorted visuals that one might find themselves experiencing on a deliriant. In a limited state of function, your brain will attempt to fill in the blanks as far as stimuli it can't interpret properly. This can result in shadow-like dark splotches in the vision, which is likely where the Hatman hallucination stemmed from, as well as insects in your face or crawling on your body as your brain tries to interpret the increased level of eye floaters and other stimuli in its limited state, combined with the itchy dysphoria that comes with many deliriants. Side note, I'm just spitballing here, but I think this aspect of insect hallucinations is rather interesting, as it's such a specific hallucination. I question if the frequency of insect hallucination comes from priming from social media and trip reports from others, or if they are the result of some sort of deep-seated evolutionary tendency to be on the lookout for insects, thus making one's brain fill in the blanks with bugs to ensure our protection, even if there aren't any there. As far as short-term side effects of deliriant use, they tend to include the aforementioned visual and auditory hallucinations, alongside a heightened state of arousal and paranoia. There's also a stark increase in blood pressure and heart rate, which can result in cardiac arrest in some cases, and an overall lowered cognition that takes the form of rapid short-term memory loss and or confusion as a whole. If you've ever tried to talk to somebody on deliriant, you'll probably know that they aren't very good at it. Needless to say, it's not a very pleasant experience. Long-term side effects are not entirely well studied. However, the limited research that has been done on them, as well as a collection of anecdotal evidence from a number of my friends that are long-term deliriant users, as well as myself, I feel as though I can compile at least some of the risks and dangers of deliriant use in the long term. As mentioned before, hallucinogen persisting perception disorder is quite prevalent among deliriant users, perhaps even more common than other drugs that can cause the disorder, such as LSD or mushrooms. On top of that, heightened aggression during and in the days or weeks following deliriant use is also quite common. This likely has to do with the interactions of anticholinergic substances with arousal and reward pathways in the brain, and maybe even some serotonergic activity depending on what deliriant you're doing specifically. Personally, I've noticed that I am substantially quicker to anger in the days following any deliriant use, to the point that others have taken notice. This is a big part of the reason why I don't do them anymore. But one of the more well-studied long-term side effects of deliriant use is damage to your heart and liver function. As stated above, acetylcholine is partially responsible for the nitric oxide regulation, which can lower blood pressure. However, in the event of the acetylcholine receptors being blocked, this production and regulation is halted, and there is much more strain put on the heart due to constricted blood vessels. The liver and kidneys also take quite a hit from deliriant use, as well as filtering any substance can be hard on the body, but particularly with something like scopolamine or Benadryl, which are essentially low-dose poisons. In Nightshade and Brugmansia, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. The presence of scopolamine functions as a natural pesticide not too dissimilar from nicotine and tobacco, and the same concept applies on the human scale. Doses that cause delirium are essentially the same that are intended to poison or dissuade animals and insects from consuming the plants that contain them, and some studies even tie in consistent medicinal doses of substances like Benadryl or hyoscine with that of early onset liver disease. Another better known long-term effect of deliriance is that of memory loss and limited cognition. According to a Harvard Health study in which 800 of the 10,000 participants studied over the span of 10 years were diagnosed with dementia, the body's production of acetylcholine diminishes with age, so blocking its effects can deliver what is called a double whammy to old people. That's real Harvard Health study phrasing right there. Double whammy. I digress. The relation between the two is not a guarantee, however, there does appear to be some correlation between long-term use of anticholinergics and dementia. And at this point in the video, you might be asking yourself, why would anyone ever use these drugs? They don't sound enjoyable, and the risks seem to drastically outweigh any potential reward, either physical or mental. And the question is something I certainly wanted to try and answer with this video, because even with all the information we've gone over thus far, there are still a growing number of people that are trying and even becoming addicted to deliriants. So, what's the appeal? To answer this question, I pose three theories: curiosity, escapism, and self-loathing. These theories often can go hand in hand with each other among deliriant users, and they're not mutually exclusive whatsoever. However, I think that looking at them separately as root causes can help better understand the mindset and nature of one who becomes a regular user of such a damaging and unpleasant drug. Curiosity. Curiosity kills the cat, as they say, and with something that has gained such a romanticized, almost cult-like following in recent years, deliriants are sure to make many people curious. Although often unpleasant and at times outright scary, the allure of deliriants and their strange, unconventional visuals can be enough to lure people into trying them. This, combined with the fact that deliriants are so accessible in a number of ways, can often result in young people with poor impulse control and foresight trying out deliriants out of sheer, unbridled curiosity. And whether they enjoy their experience or have a bad time is really not of consideration to many of the people who take to deliriants. It's more about understanding exactly what it feels like to be in such a disturbed state of being for a time. The recent romanticization of drugs like Benadryl and Datura on YouTube and TikTok in the form of trip report and iceberg videos certainly contributes to the sort of lore that has been built around it. Benadryl specifically has gained a somewhat meme-like status as of a few years ago at this point, and through that media, it has opened many people's eyes to its capabilities as an abusable substance. Whether intentional or not, this sort of platforming has undeniably introduced many people to a dangerous and unpleasant world, the world of deliriants. Theory 2. Escapism. I feel as though this is likely the most common gateway into delirium abuse. To be honest, this was the method by which I found myself doing deliriants. When I was younger and doing a number of other substances, I would find myself broke and unable to get my hands on anything more than Benadryl. And from my own addictive personality and lack of willingness to feel sober, I learned to enjoy it. Although unpleasant, often scary, and hell for your body, some people quite literally find anything is better than being sober for them. And when deliriants are so easy to access and so cheap, they become the first option when you don't have many others. Put simply, for some people, the want to do deliriants is not about the want to do deliriants. It's about the want to feel normal. Truth is, escapism is a drive for many substances and not just that of deliriants. The root cause of addiction is often much more than the drug itself, and more something greater going on in a person's mental, and delirium addiction is no exception. Theory 3. Self-loathing. This is probably the least common of the three theories, however, I think to skip over it altogether would be omitting far too much. There are some people who abuse deliriants purely for the negative and bad feelings during and after the high itself, and unfortunately, as to not get struck down on YouTube, I can't exactly go deep into the intricacies of how this behavior can present itself, but let it be known that this is a very present reality for some deliriant users. And on that note, I do think I can wrap this video up in reiterating the disclaimer I said earlier. These substances, although interesting and fascinating to learn about, are not something to be treated or taken lightly. They are dangerous, they have killed, and they will again. Unlike some other substances, there is very little true recreational value to deliriants. If you came to this video to decide whether or not you should try them, let this be not only your warning, but your plea from me not to. I truly do hope you enjoyed this video. If you want more substance and pharmacology oriented content, leave a comment down below. I'm full of this shit. So thank you for watching. It's been Zem. Peace out.